I am so excited to present our new DIR Parent Network. We at ICDL have worked hard to listen to your wishes and have put together an incredible program of support and resources for caregivers. Let's continue our amazing community supporting each other and build upon it. Let's support, learn, and thrive together. More information at icdl.com/parents or affectautism.com/events. You're listening to Affect Autism, where affect is the #1 tool we use in supporting child development through playful interactions. Welcome, listeners, to the We Chose Play podcast. I'm Daria Brown, and I am thrilled to have two new guests, first-time appearance on the podcast. I have Andrea Snyder, who is an occupational therapist and DIR expert in Colorado Springs. She sees clients in the home setting and teaches certificate courses for the International Council on Development and Learning. We also have Naomi Wong, who's a speech-language pathologist and DIR expert in Singapore, who owns a clinic called Speech Therapy Adventures, helping parents and children navigate their developmental adventure together. She also teaches certificate courses for ICDL. So welcome, both of you. It's so great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Happy to
us
be here.
here.
The three of us saw each other in New York City at the International Council of Development and Learning's DIR conference. Andrea and Naomi presented on the third functional emotional developmental capacity, intentionality, and two-way communication. And I am going to put a link to Naomi's YouTube channel in the blog post for today's podcast because they recreated that presentation and put it up on YouTube. So instead of rehashing what they already presented, we're going to just highlight bits and pieces of that. You can go back and watch that through the link. And what we're talking about today is moving from FEDC 3 to FEDC 4. So if people are already eyes glazed over, if you're new to floor time or DIR model, developmental, individual differences, relationship-based model, we're talking about the third to fourth functional, emotional, developmental capacity. And when we talk about these foundational developmental capacities that children progress through, which is what we're targeting when we're doing floor time, a lot of parents say, and me included, how do we know when we're in FEDC 4? How do we know when we're at that shared problem solving where children start to develop that theory of mind and an idea that I am someone separate from that other person and start to get this whole sequencing of, beginning, middle, end and start to do some basic imitation imaginary play and from things they've seen and all of these things. And so, my son, I think, has dove into this fourth capacity probably 5 or 6 years ago, and we're still swimming in it. It's the big one. So Andrea and Naomi are going to walk us through this transition from the third to fourth capacity and how important getting that third capacity really mastered and solidified promotes the developmental progress into the fourth capacity. So let's start with highlighting the third functional emotional developmental capacity, intentionality and two-way communication. And for those that maybe just Naomi, just quickly say the first two. And if you want to start at 0, Colette Ryan said on our podcast last time that she considers safety or a sense of safety as the 0 functional emotional developmental capacity. And then the first being, you want to talk about the first two and how that leads into 3, and then we'll go from there.
Yep, sure. So like you said it, 0 is nicely about safety. And so in the first capacity transits from a sensory realm into an emotional realm. So, we have sensory integration that is really good. And if you can integrate your senses well, you then have the emotional availability to attend to conversations, to attend to someone and to communicate with someone. So that's the first capacity. So you have the emotional availability and attention to look and to interact with somebody. In the second emotional capacity, we are looking at that gleam in the eye, the ability to fall in love and the ability to have a back and forth simple circle with someone that you have. So think of a baby who is cooing to his or her caregiver, and that caregiver looking and smiling back, and the baby smiles back, and that circle can go on and on.
I just want to jump in for a minute. Naomi, I have never heard the first functional emotional developmental capacity explained so beautifully as you just did. It's almost like an occupational therapist definition of it, although you're the speech language pathologist. But just, Andrea's clapping, that whole idea of that sensory integration and just feeling regulated and okay in your body so that you can attend to others. And then the second capacity,
Yes.
officially called engaging and relating.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I chose that first, the definition for the first, because when I refer parents to occupational therapists, they find it hard to figure out why they needed to go there, because all they wanted to work on is the communication bit. And so once I explain it this way, they are happy to go sort out the sensory integration component of things. All right, on to the third, emotional capacity. So the third emotional capacity is called initiation, and having that idea to want to communicate. And so in our New York conference, we themed it intentionality. So we themed it that because we wanted the for all of us to think about the child having to take the initiative and to communicate, and really having to take the initiative would mean that you have to give the child a purpose, because having a purpose and having something to talk about and having something to share is the very first step to meaningful communication. So if we want intentionality to come on board, we really need to woo them, and for them to have something to really want to talk to you about, right? So that's the whole point of meaningful communication. So, when we think about meaningful communication, sometimes the children that we work with, they sometimes have mismatched words or mismatched gestures, and they may sometimes have mismatched effect. So that's where it is tricky. And we know that we are still looking at FEDC 3, and we would like to help parents untangle and to figure out what is going on and why we should continue to work in FEDC 3. And so that gets sticky at times. So this brings me to an example that I'm thinking about. This little kid that I saw yesterday, he's quite cute. He would jump on the sofa in my clinic, and he would say things like, "Oh, you cannot jump after you eat." So he will keep jumping and saying that you cannot jump after you eat. So if you think about it, that is what his parents have been saying to him, and he has been taking that entire script and repeating it back whenever he's jumping on that sofa, because he knows that that's not what he's supposed to do. But conversely, in that same session yesterday, he was taking a transparent rattle of mine, shaking it, looking at it very intently, and he was really curious about it because he wanted to take the beads out. He said, "Oh, this is not a real bottle, it's a fake." So he's thinking that the rattle is a bottle. So if you compare both sentences side by side, just because I'm a speech pathologist and I really love to compare length of words and their intentionality, the shorter sentence, "This is a fake bottle," actually makes a lot more sense. Intentionality wise, it's conveying a lot more compared to that long sentence of him jumping on the sofa when he says, "You cannot eat right up, you cannot jump right after a meal." Yes. So we have a couple of things that we talk about, like, mismatched affect, mismatched words, and of course, mismatched gestures. So that's another one that I typically see in my clinic as well. So there would be kids who might have their hands pointing to something else, but that's not actually what they want. They might be pointing to a toy, but actually their eyes are looking at something else. And that, the eyes are the windows to their soul, and, whatever their hands are pointing to is like a decoy. So you have to follow their eyes and to know what exactly they are looking at to find out what their real intentionality is. So yeah, so I think sometimes parents find it hard because we are so tuned to reading and listening to words, and we are not really good at reading body language. And as such, we get parents, so sometimes parents get really frustrated because they are not able to communicate properly and they cannot properly understand their children, and therefore the frustration builds up between the parent and the child. So, to summarize, we talked about mismatch affect, we discussed gestures, and we discussed words, just to make it really easy for all of us to remember. In floor time, we used to talk about WA, which is words, affect, and actions. If we were to map it to what we've talked about, it would be communication. So it can be gestural, and it can be with words, it can be with alternate communication device. We can also be talking about, alternate gestures, which is like what we talked about, the actions, and also the mismatch effect. So it can be cues. So their face may be showing you different cues to what they are thinking about. Yeah.
So you made me think of something that may not directly relate to the third capacity because it might have to do with my son's impulsivity and other things. But it's something that just came up in the last few months, and I think it goes to your point about watching their eyes. So my son loves Super Mario, and we have this Monopoly Super Mario, and now he's into playing regular Monopoly, but we use Mario characters as the pieces instead of the actual pieces that come with the game. And so he gets so excited to play this game, and we'll have three players, and we'll be moving, and he's so excited. And we've spent years working on counting with the object instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and just like not matching what he's counting. And so, you know, what he does is he'll tend to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it sort of trails off. So, a friend of mine noticed, not mom, mom didn't notice, someone else noticed that when he's on track, he's watching his figure. But his eyes then get distracted because what he loves to do is he loves to change his figures like between every turn. He's now I'm going to be Toad. Now I'm going to be Princess Peach. Now I'm going to be this other character. So he gets so excited about what's going to happen next that he looks away and then he's going 3, 4, 5, 6 and not watching. Now I never would have caught that. But this other person caught it. And so now I can say, watch your character, like, wait, start again. We didn't count right. And now my son is almost 15. So this, a lot of parents that are listening who are thinking about these capacities, are talking about much younger children. I was working on these capacities with my son when he was much younger, but I'm still working on getting that FEDC3 robust with him because he has a lot of holes in that capacity, let's just say. So I think that's more about his impulsivity when he's looking away and excited to do something else. And maybe Andrea will speak to that, I don't know. But I just wanted to point out how it is so easy for parents to miss something that simple as his eyes wandered off. And what are they looking at? What are they interested in? Like, it's really, I have a podcast on something about cues with, watching cues that children give and send with Colette Ryan that I'll put a link to in the blog post. And that's been a challenge of mine. So I was happy to hear you say parents sometimes have a hard time reading their children's cues because I thought maybe it was just me. But I think it's many parents like have trouble understanding those cues or tuning into those cues. And some parents are definitely more natural at picking up those cues than others.
Yeah, definitely. It's not just you. Uh, Many of the parents that I work with, especially when their kiddos are verbal, it's natural for all of us as parents to tune into what is verbal. And when the kid is verbal, you would not try and listen in to the body language. And when you're not looking at the child and listening to that body language, that we are missing out a whole lot of communication. One of the first few lectures that I did when I was in my uni days was to find out what's the amount of verbal communication versus body language, and it is really a 70-30 split. Yes, so it's the 70% that we are not tuning into, which really needs the work, and that tells a lot more for especially kiddos in this third capacity.
I think what you were saying, Daria, is something that's so important to think about, because when we're thinking about what your son is looking towards, that speaks to his intentionality and what that intrinsic motivation is for him. He's so excited to change that character and get the new Mario character when he gets to that spot. And so I'm going through the actions, but my true intrinsic intentionality is what I'm looking towards, what I'm focusing on with my eyes, with my body, not those motor actions that I'm just passively going through to be able to get to what it is that I'm intentionally interested in interacting with.
Yes, I like that you pointed that out because it's true. Like that intentionality in him is strong and it's been there for a long time. It's the back and forth, maintaining that back and forth, that's the challenge with him. But I know that, in my documentary series We Chose Play, where I document the floor time journey from the beginning, I talk about, at the beginning, it didn't seem like there was intention there. And you're trying to get that engagement, and you might have to initiate the circles to get your child to respond before they start to initiate and get that going. And I know, like, again, I'll link to that presentation on the third capacity that these two lovely ladies have done. That's public on YouTube. So yeah, getting that going really does come naturally once that engagement is strengthened. And like Kathy Platzman says, and she tells me she got it from somewhere else, like when you strengthen that first capacity, you get the second capacity for free. When you strengthen that second capacity, you get the third one for free. When you strengthen the third one, you get the fourth for free. So let's talk about the differences between that third and fourth capacity and how we know, Andrea, if we are in the fourth capacity. Maybe just highlight what is the fourth capacity, because it is immense. Like it should be like 5 subcapacities or more.
Yes, capacity 4. So that shared social problem solving, like you said, Daria, it is a huge capacity. And this is something that we talk about so often within the DIR floor time community about how big capacity 4 truly, truly is. Where when our children are starting to enter into capacity 4, this is where we start to see some of that representational play start to come out. Our children start playing different themes that they experience on a day-to-day basis of going to school, caregivers going to work, making dinner, different things like that. But one of the big shifts that we see when we're moving from capacity 3 to capacity 4 is that emotional quality. So this is where we really start to see those emotions come into all of those interactions. And so even in just that back and forth intentional communication, we're going to have more emotional embedding of different feelings, different experiences into those interactions once we start moving into capacity 4 in comparison to capacity 3, where we're really getting that back and forth robust interaction together and we're emotionally connected, but we're not emotionally expressing our internal feelings like we do when we move into capacity 4.
Okay, and I will say that there is a podcast coming up strictly on capacity 4 with Katie Shepard and Sinette Lawrence, who presented on capacity 4 at the New York City conference. So this is like, listeners, you're gonna get full on capacity 4, because I know there's so many questions about it. But I love this podcast sort of as an intro to theirs, where it's more of a deep dive into 4, and your presentation, which again I'm linking to, is a deep dive into capacity 3, and this one is sort of bridging the two.
Yeah, so in our presentation, we talked a lot about supporting the individual differences, and that when we are supporting the individual difference of that child, we are going to get into capacity 3 a lot more. So I'm going to bring back to that kid that I was talking about with that rattle, so his individual difference was that he loves music. So every time any musical instrument comes on board and we are singing alongside with that, you can see that gleam in his eyes turn on. So we are using that. So we have traveled and journeyed through one, two, and then with support. So that support is there for him. With support, he has that instrument that he is looking at, is interested in. With support, he is able to then coin that long sentence like, oh, I really want to open this bottle, but I can't. This is a fake bottle. Yeah. So that's the support that we give a child to help them navigate to three. And we need to be very mindful what support is essential and to be able to support that child so that they can continue to be there. I think that's really key.
So would you say that following his lead is part of that?
Yes, definitely, definitely. So following his lead, following his preferences in his individual differences are really big key to help getting there. Whereas in FEDC 4, we might not need that much support and the kid is able to sort of get there. We might follow their lead a bit less, not as robust and not as strict in FEDC 3. Yeah.
And I think one of the big things when we're thinking FEDC 3, like Naomi was saying, is those individual differences, really honing in on what it is that we know is intrinsically motivating for the child that we're working with, and making sure we have that out and available. Because if it's intrinsically motivating, then it's going to support them in wanting to have that intentional communication with us as the therapist or with their caregivers, their parents, whoever it is that they're playing with in that moment. And so really honing in on their play preferences, their sensory preferences, their motor preferences, and by supporting all of those different capacities and areas is going to really allow our children that intrinsic freedom to fully express with us what it is that they're wanting to do and how it is that they're wanting to play with whatever it is that we're doing. So like with Naomi's client, she knows that he loves music. So when she plays with him, she's going to have toys or items that are going to support that music desire, that music motivator. And through that, that's going to allow him that intrinsic freedom to really open up that intentionality of interaction and communication with Naomi.
When my child has a robust back and forth communication, which does not mean verbal, it's gestural or, whatever. And, in neurotypical children, this is a non-speaking stage. But in our kids, like, for instance, Naomi, I didn't bring it up at the time, but I'll bring it up now. Like when you said, when the infant is cooing and stuff like that, like when we read the descriptions of the capacities, even on ICDL's website, a lot of times it's describing neurotypical development and it's saying when the baby does this and the baby reaches for your hand. And I know parents are like, but my kid's not a baby. Like my kid is 8. So what does that look like in my kid? And that's the frustrating part that's trying to understand. So if I'm thinking about the third capacity in theory, I know that my child is intentionally communicating with me, responding to whatever communication I'm sending back. So that might look like, okay, I'm just making this up off the top of my head. You're holding up the fake bottle, the rattle, and the child looks at you, and then you go, and then they smile, and right there, that's 2 circles of communication. So we're getting more and more of those, like back, forth, and that didn't include any words. And when you have that like robust back and forth many times a day, et cetera, then you're sort of able to creep into 4. But that's my like layperson theory, like of I think what you're supposed to do. But then what does that look like in practice? And it totally depends on the child and individual differences and everything. So I'll let you guys explain.
Yeah. So when you are holding up that rattle and you have that circle of communication going. So we are looking at the quality of it. So we are looking at going back to WA, so the words or communication, the affect or the cues, the action or the gesture. So all those three align and are intentional, and they all look at, in that case that you're giving, they all look at the rattle and they are holding it on and they're playing and he's having fun with that rattle. So all three aligns nicely for that communication purpose. So that's what we are looking at. And as the communication goes back and forth, maybe somebody might just drop the rattle and it might just roll somewhere else. And then, oops, where did it go? So in a good floor time, there is always that engagement, and there is also that challenge that creeps in when the engagement is there. And that's our little challenge. And we want to challenge a kid within a good floor time session to know whether or not they are ready to move on and how much support we have given beforehand. And if there is that challenge, would they be able to go find it, or would they lose that interaction because it's just too hard, it's too difficult for them to continue that same circle of communication and to continue that idea.
So I will, in the blog post, refer people to the podcast I did on communication, action, affect, or words, action, affect, as it used to be called, that I did with another speech language pathologist. And I will also refer back to the I have a couple of, I think I have a blog post called Expanding and Challenging, Why Those Are Necessary, and then the rubber band analogy with Jackie Bartel and Sanjay, who's the OT. Is he also in Singapore?
Yes, he's
Yes.
in
Okay.
Singapore.
So that rubber band where we're getting that just right challenge, that just perfect stretching, challenging a little bit, playful obstruction or whatever it is. Um, Playful obstruction being like if the child's trying to drive something and you block it by accident, oh, my hand is stuck, just being like silly and playful, and a challenge, like you said, like, oops, I dropped the rattle, where did it go? Those kinds of things. That makes me think of getting into the fourth capacity of shared problem solving, where what if the rattle goes under the couch? Are they ready to do that problem solving with you to find it? So did I move too quickly into four? Or I like what you said, like we're looking at, can they handle a little bit of challenge? How robust is that communication, affect, action kind of thing, the gestures and all of that matching together? How much support do you have? Because if you take the support away and you're not seeing that third capacity, that's where that learning tree, that last book of Dr. Greenspan, has the tree trunk is the functional, emotional, developmental capacities. And I remember Jake Greenspan said to me about my son, your son has all six capacities, like this was at least 7 years ago, but the tree is super narrow and we want to widen that tree. So making all those capacities more robust, meaning, can he do it with different people in different situations, through different emotional experiences, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that contributes to how robust that capacity is. And I guess you just keep strengthening as you go. I'll let Andrea comment on that.
I think that's one of the challenges of when we're working with our clients and our children is our parents, their caregivers, we want to continue that progression, right? We want to move from capacity 3 to capacity 4. We want to see that next step. But one of the things that's so important is that we want to sit in capacity 3 and we want to make it as strong and as robust as we possibly can. It can be very easy to quickly jump from capacity 3 to trying to get some of that shared social problem solving, adding in playful obstruction when we get a few of those back and forth interactions, intentional interactions with our children. But what we really want to look for is that robustness of it. We want the depth. We don't want it to be with this one item, this one toy. toy. We want to be able to have that intentional interaction with a variety of different toys, a variety of different caregivers, settings, all of those pieces. And once we have that depth and that richness to capacity 3, that really opens the door for our children to seamlessly move into capacity 4. And it's hard to not want to jump into capacity 4 when we have that back and forth. We're like, yes, we're here, we're intentional, we've got that back and forth, let's keep going. Let's move into more of that imaginative play or that emotional themes. But we want to sit and hold capacity 3 as long as we can to build that robustness, which is going to set our children up for that success to move into capacity 4 and to solidly move into capacity 4, to be able to have that intentionality when there is a little bit of a challenge. One of the things, so for me as an OT, most of my children love to jump or swing or things like that. And so, oh no, the swing is stuck. How are we going to get the swing up? Right? If I didn't have that robustness of that interaction, of that intentionality, my child would just walk away. They would be like, I'm not going to even bother. This is too much for me right now. And so we really want to build that robustness in that intentional back and forth communication before we add in that playful obstruction. Now, the slight little like, uh-oh, where'd the bottle go? That's a beautiful little test to see, are we ready to start stretching a little bit more? Because it's a small shift. It's a small challenge. And I think that's one of the keys when we move in from capacity 3 to capacity 4 is we want to start with that super small challenge. So say I have a child that I'm working with and we're doing the swing. I might have the swing up and ready for them, but not high enough that we can actually get the movement that the child wants. So just that slight shift in what we've done in the past to see if we can figure out how we're going to raise it up, or if they can cue me for raising up the swing, similar to Naomi and her example of dropping the bottle and it accidentally rolling under the couch. It's just the smallest little shift. And that's how we know when our children are ready to move in from capacity 3 to capacity 4, is when that small little shift, they take it and they're like, I got this, right? We've given them that intrinsic ability to figure out what comes next to achieve that goal with us, with their play partner together. And that's the big piece.
Yeah, I think the big idea here is a small
Mm-hmm.
challenge. It's not a big full-fledged hide and seek, and it is a slow roll away from maybe the bottle into the couch. They can see it, like they can literally track where it has gone. So it is a simple challenge. It's not difficult at all. And then we can see whether or not they are ready. If they are not ready and they don't follow, their eyes don't follow, we know it's our turn to, continue FEDC 3, and that's it. The litmus test, we didn't pass. We just continue. Yes.
And I think one of the other things about that shift from capacity 3 to capacity 4 is we want to make sure that that small shift still includes the clinician or the caregiver or the parent. We want the child and their play partner to figure out where the bottle went jointly together, not just the child going off and solving the problem on their own. Because again, in the DIR model, it's all about that relationship. And so when we're thinking that shift from capacity 3 to capacity 4, we don't want to lose that relational quality of us being in it together and finding the bottle together or pulling the swing up together, whatever that small shift is that we're introducing, that we want to make sure that the child is maintaining that intentionality with their play partner through that little shift.
Yeah. So FEDC 3 and 4 really points to that relational, that conversational, that interactional quality as compared to, your ability to solve a problem by yourself, which is not what this is all about. It's about doing it together. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a common misconception when parents are learning. It's getting dark here. I'm going to just turn on my light. It's a misconception when they hear they hear shared problem solving, but they just hear the problem solving part, and they're like, my child goes and solves the problem. But the shared component, the social component, is what is essential in this capacity. But just commenting on a couple of things that you said. So if you make the challenge too big and the child walks away and you know that it was too much for them. So a few things about that. Behavior tells us things, and the child walking away tells us maybe this was too hard. So I forget which episode of We Chose Play, I showed a clip of a consultation with Dr. Gil Tippy, and it's a video of my son and his dad playing, and dad starts to use the crane in a symbolic way, and my son goes, ah, and walks away, and Dr. Tippy says, why did he walk away? And I'm like, he didn't like what dad was doing. And Dr. Tippy says, it's not just that he didn't like what dad was doing, it was functionally, emotionally, developmentally too far ahead of what he is capable of at this time. So that behavior gives us that message. And then, so another thing I want to say about that is a lot of times, parents don't know what to do when their child walks away, because they're like, oh, they're not interested in playing with me. They're not interested. And that could be for many reasons. Like a lot of times, my son would go walk around the room and then he'd come right back. So he might just need to regulate or move and then come back. So you don't know if you've totally lost him just because he walked away. You may need that additional processing time or whatever it is. But the other thing is, I think when a child's walking away and you're thinking about these challenges, a lot of times we are making that challenge too big for our kids. And I talked about this in the We Chose Play series too, like in episode 6 of season 1, Colette Ryan is doing a coaching session with me, and it's showing this whole play sequence of me doing floor time with my son as I'm just learning floor time. So like, it's not like the greatest floor time or whatever, but Colette is sort of coaching me through it retrospectively, because we're looking at it 7 years later. But I'm remembering what I'm thinking in that moment at the time. And all I was thinking is teaching, 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 teaching. And so I'm thinking, I got a challenge, because I hear, oh, floor time is about challenging. So I do one challenge, then I do 2 challenges, then I do 3, 4 challenges. And I'm like, just boom, 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 challenging him so far. And Colette's saying like, whoa, what are you doing, Mom? And we talk through it. For people that are interested, I'll put the link to the We Chose Play series. But the thing that stood out for me again, one time with Dr. Gil Tippy, basically consulting with me saying, you know what, if you change one little thing, work on that for like 3 months. I'd stay with it for 3 months. And I'm thinking, what? Like I stayed with it for 3 seconds. And then I went on to the next challenge, literally 3 seconds. And he's like, 3 months. And that was a big eye opener for me. So I hear what you're saying, Andrea, and I just want to drive that point home to parents, because if they're in the situation where I was, they're trying to teach, they're trying to challenge, they're like, oh, what about this? Oh, I wonder this. And it's like, whoa, back up. Just keep that back and forth interaction going.
I love that you brought that up, Daria, because I think that's something that us as clinicians or parents or caregivers, we feel stuck in the play. We feel like we're doing the same thing over and over and over. And there's this voice in the back of our mind constantly going, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? But the amazing thing about this model is that we're intrinsically motivating our children. We're intrinsically giving them that freedom to want to continue through these developmental capacities. And our children are going to show us when they're ready to take that next little shift. They're going to show us when they're ready for us to give them that expansion. And it's only that voice in the back of our head that's telling us we're not doing enough, when we're doing everything that we should by following the lead of our child and waiting for them to give us that cue that they're ready. And sometimes we might take that cue and we might take it just a little bit too far. And our child, like you said, Daria, sometimes your son just needed that break to re-regulate himself, to get a little bit of movement, to get a little bit of pause, to get a little bit of processing time. And then he was able to come back and rejoin you with that same activity. But sometimes we might push just a little bit too far. We might break that interaction a little bit. And it's okay if we have that little rupture, because it allows that opportunity for that repair. And that repair is so powerful when we're thinking of that intentional communication, because repairs happen all day, every day to all of us. What do we do with that repair? What do we do when there's a rupture? How do we reinitiate that interaction and that intentionality with our child, which is going to set them up for future experiences where it might happen again in the classroom or with a peer. And it's okay if I had a little rupture, because now I know how to repair it and how to re-engage in that intentional interaction with that person. And we're going to go back to where we were before that repair or before that rupture happened, and we're going to re-strengthen it again. And we're going to rejoin and we're going to refollow. And then in 2 weeks, in 2 months, we're going to try that little challenge again and see if our child's ready for it this time. And this time they might be, and we're going to continue to grow and develop.
I'm so glad you brought up the rupture and repair, because if other parents are like me, you get into this mode of like performing. So I'm the floor time parent now, so I have to do this and I have to do that. And you forget to just be yourself. And then that leads to the whole theme I've been on this past year, which is learning about parent regulation. So to me, parent regulation was always like, okay, dad, play with our kid, and I'm going out with my friends, or I'm going out for a run, or I'm going out to dinner, and then I come back and whew, I'm regulated now. What about when I'm with my child? I never ever did that. I always was like in, performance mode, and then I'd get irritated or agitated, and I'd get dysregulated and overwhelmed, when it's okay. Like I can just say, I need a break right now. And I did a podcast with a parent about parent self-regulation. There's going to be more coming up because Colette Ryan's just finishing her PhD on parent self-efficacy, and we're going to be talking about this for months to come. I know it, on the podcast. But that whole idea of waiting for the child's cues that you said, like we feel like we're not doing enough, that's so essential, because like, we, like Jackie Bartell says, we're human beings, not human doings. Like we're so used to doing stuff. We're supposed to be doing stuff. We're the parent. We're supposed to be teaching. We're supposed to be doing stuff. And it is uncomfortable to just sit and wait on the child's cues and follow the child's cues. And that's like a real art. It takes a lot of time. And then not only knowing your child, but then your child changes, and then it all changes, and it's so dynamic. So it is a complex process, but it doesn't need to be complex if you just remember to just be in the moment and sort of wait on your child. Did you want to comment on any of that stuff, Naomi?
Yeah, sure. So when we are able to wait with our child and we are able to sort of engage them in a relaxed conversation and just really having that just nice challenge. So that just nice challenge in my head, I'm thinking the parent is having fun, truly having fun, without an agenda in their mind, without having to push for another goal, that the child is also truly having like a good time with the parent, having a good conversation. Such a conversation can be very regulating for both the parent and the child. And when we are talking about co-regulating each other within a conversation and being able to have that restedness in that conversation and just having fun, so that that conversation is rejuvenating for both the parent and the child. And in this case, when you have a conversation that is both very rejuvenating for parent and the child, there is that sense of like what Jackie Batal has said, sense of being together, and that sense of, we are together in this conversation. There is a good back and forth. That good back and forth is helping us build this relationship, and that good back and forth is able to help, keep us together in a relationship. And over time, you're getting this nice bond and this intimacy in this relationship, which is what we really want for parent and child, rather than you taking on too many, as a parent, taking on too many hats, wanting to teach the child, wanting to push the FEDC, wanting to be that therapist, also being that parent. I think it's too much going on. So, if you set aside your time for being a parent and you set aside your time being a therapist at home for your child doing that floor time, so knowing when is that time. So if you're a parent, just go without agenda and just be with your child. And if you are, it's time to play with your child and doing your floor time, be that parent doing that floor time. So don't try and wear too many hats. As parents, we all need to space ourselves out and being able to have our own well-being, because that eventually will help us go for the long run, right? Be with our kid for the longer run.
And I'm glad that you ended off with the being and playing, because at first you were saying conversation, and I'm thinking of non-speaking children and how being with them and doing those circles of communication around play that don't even involve any words. Whether your child's speaking or non-speaking, you still have a conversation, so to speak, but it's might be a non-speaking conversation. It looks like Andrea wants to say something here.
I love what Naomi was saying about the being. And I think one of the things as parents that another just kind of thing to keep in the back of our mind is that power of the pause to actively be in the interaction. And our world moves so fast. And I know this is something that even for me as a clinician and as a parent, we're constantly thinking of what's next. But that power of pause within those interactions with our children is so important, because it really allows that opportunity for our child to show us that what's next, because they've got that idea, but sometimes they need that extra time from a processing, from a motor planning, from an initiation standpoint. And so giving that power of that pause to truly sit in that interaction and in that connection with your child gives so much power to our children for that next, what's next. And when we give them that what's next opportunity, that just drives them for that next opportunity. Because when we give them that power of our pause, it gives them that intrinsic, I've got this, and they're waiting to see what I'm going to do next versus me needing to respond to what my parent or my caregiver or my clinician does next. And so giving that power of pause for that intentionality is such a power piece and allows that true active being in the interaction.
Andrea, do you remember when we were teaching together, there were a couple of times where therapists had that pause, they exhaled, and after that exhale, that interaction was so much regulated, was so
Yeah.
much better. Yeah. So I think the same goes for parents, and if they just, exhale and breathe in, that the interaction might be a lot better and the child is more regulated and they are co-regulating each other a lot better.
Yeah, and a lot of times we're rushing through stuff so much that our kids just end up learning, like, and again, Dr. Tippy talks about this too. He has it in one of his Four on the Floors. He did these series of YouTube short videos during COVID called Four on the Floor, and I will link to whichever one I'm talking about once I figure out which one it is. I think he did 11 of them. When we're rushing, and then the child ends up thinking that there's a right answer or a wrong answer, because we're rushing in and we're expecting something of them, and then they feel like, oh, there's a demand on me, I have to do something, is it right or is it wrong? And they're, kids are usually eager to please their parents and do the right thing, so we're not giving them that opportunity. So I like the way you went through that, Andrea, about really pausing and literally waiting, like, what is your idea? Like, instead of me directing what you should do all day long, and even the best of floor timers are still always directing. Like, it's something we naturally do. Like, okay, time to get dressed. Okay, we got to get ready for this. We got to do this. We're always directing our children's behavior at school. They're always being directed. Let's give them that time where we just sit back and see what they have to offer. So I thought we would end the podcast with sort of giving an example or an exercise for how parents could do this, because everything sounds great, but then the parents always say to me, but I don't know how to do it with my child. I don't know where to start. And so you guys might have examples too, but I'm thinking of the easiest example is, say, on a Saturday or Sunday or one day where you have nothing to rush to. You have like an hour or two free and you're getting your child dressed. Just sit back, time to get dressed. And usually they get dressed and then you wait. And this is another one of Dr. Tippy's Four on the Floors. And then, maybe you're like, shirt? pants? I'm just making, whatever, socks, whatever. And you're just waiting and see what the child does. And eventually, like, it might take 2 hours to get dressed. But in that 2 hours, maybe you're like, oh, where are the socks? And you're just giving subtle hints until they take the initiative, and maybe they go open the drawer, and then you're holding up a sock and see what they do with it, or you put it on their hand and wait to see what they do with it. Like, that's a little bit like, wait, it doesn't go on my hand, and see if they kind of look at you funny and make funny affect, like, silly me, like, ah, it doesn't go on your hand, or whatever it is. Just take forever just to get dressed. So can you, like, elaborate on that example? Because, like, I'm just saying it off the top of my head, but what would you consider, like, to watch out for or to think about in that scenario, Andrea?
I think the piece that I love about your example, Daria, is that it's very easy for us to say, okay, it's time to get dressed, and then kind of disconnect, disengage. But throughout that entire example, you're holding the space affectively. You're still sending those emotional signals to your child. You're excited, you're curious, you're wondering, but you're sending that emotional experience to your child so that they know that you're not just sitting there waiting, but you're excited while you're waiting. You're wondering what the child is going to do. And holding that emotional space in that wait is so powerful. I've done very similar things with clients about, all right, what are we going to play today? And I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait. And they might sit there and look at me and not know. And so I might start visually gazing around the room and directing them affectively, like, oh, I wonder, do you think? And giving them that space, that pause. If they're stuck, I'm going to give them a little cue, a little nudge, and then wait again and see if they're able to take my little cue and come up with that what's next. Sometimes it's we're going to go outside. Sometimes they're going to pull a game that they want to do or grab the ball or whatever it might be. But I'm going to affectively hold that space in anticipation and excitement and wonder, which gives our children that motivation to keep going, even if they're not quite sure what that going is, where they're headed. That anticipation gives them that space to be like, they're excited for whatever it is that I'm going to bring to the table. And so I'm just going to bring whatever it is that looks motivating to me in that moment.
Yeah, so, like I hear people saying, like I hear floor time practitioners saying to parents all the time, and I repeat to parents all the time, and I need to repeat to myself all the time, slow down even more, and then when you think you couldn't go any slower, slow down even more. Because it's so true. We're just constantly rushing. Like, if parents do videos of their floor time and then watch, like, you could literally put it at 0.2 speed and you're still going too fast. So yeah, that's the message that is always repeated. Slow down, and wait. Yeah. Any other last words, Naomi?
Yes. So I want to piggyback on the slowing down. So when we slow down, we are slowing down to speed things up. All right. which is which is the paradox here. So when we are slowing down, we are giving the child the choice to choose, the choice to think about things, the choice and the time, the chance to initiate, which is really key for what we are talking about today, FEDC 3, like the ability to be intentional, the ability to initiate. So if we are doing the opposite, and we are trying to entertain, and we're trying to rush through this process instead of waiting for them to choose, we are go like, oh, hi Johnny, would you like to do this or this? And if you're trying to rush through and we're trying to entertain them like a clown, making sure that they have the best experiences, we try to fill their time, we try to make sure that they are entertained and they are engaged in a sense, in our sense, and be involved in our sense, in our dictionary. So what really happens is that we rob them of this time for them to think. we rob them of this time for them to process and to really come up with their own idea and be able to communicate that idea. And we really rob them of this FEDC3, which is, not exactly where we want to go today, but, we want us to think about that the key is pausing, and the total opposite is to really push and to really entertain them, in short.
So,
Yeah.
yep, that's two other podcasts I have to refer to, with Maud LaRue, Moving Slower to Move Faster, and with Mike Fields, Creating Opportunities in Floor Time. He talks about being an opportunity thief. When, like you said, you're robbing them of whatever. He says, thief, thief. His colleague says to him, thief, you're being an opportunity thief. And one I forgot to mention, but I will put in the blog post too, when we were talking about co-regulation. Kashina Holder really described it so wonderfully, this opportunities for co-regulatory support. So I'm going to refer people to that podcast too. So lots of links to go through from here, lots of anticipation for the upcoming podcasts that will continue diving into the fourth functional emotional developmental capacity of the DIR model. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you so much, Naomi. We're in all different time zones. We managed to match this up so that it's, evening for me, morning for Naomi, and dinner time for Andrea. So I'm so glad we made this work. Thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Daria. It was fantastic.
ICDL's new DIR Parent Network. Support, learn, and thrive together. There's so much value in our new DIR Parent Network. I cannot wait to interact with all of you and watch our support for each other grow. More information at icdl.com/parents or affectautism.com/events. Until next time, here's to choosing play and experiencing joy every day. Looking for a podcast on a specific topic or trying to find one you listened to before? Check the Start Here menu at affectautism.com, where you can search all podcasts and blog posts by topic, category, profession, or specific guest. You can also type in keywords into the search box, which is the magnifying glass icon at the top right of the website. Check it all out at affectautism.com.